Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Kerri Dugan.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on thriving in austere environments. My name is Kerri Dugan, and I'm the Director for the Biological Technologies Office at DARPA. Today, I will discuss some of DARPA's current investments in developing technologies that will allow our warfighters to thrive in austere environments. As I talk about how we're approaching problems associated with operating in these environments, I'm aware that both the problem and the solution space are vast. I know we have not imagined all the possible solutions, so I turn to you in the audience. We want to hear from you with questions, comments, ideas, suggestions, and input. Who knows? Maybe these discussions that we have will bring about a new DARPA program to solve some of the warfighters' hardest problems. So one quick note before I get into the overview. Our Q&A feature on the DARPA Forward virtual event platform is live now. Please don't wait until the end of the talk to submit questions. You should feel free to submit your questions or comments as you think of them, and I will address as many as I can at the end of this session. Without waiting any longer, let's dive in. So, part of DARPA's mission is to create technology that supports the warfighter whenever and wherever they operate. The more austere an environment, oftentimes the bigger the challenge to meet these warfighter needs. So when I say a warfighter needs, I'm referring to their essential needs, things like food, water, and shelter. With these essential needs met, our warfighters can persist and achieve their mission pretty much anywhere on the planet. But we also need to consider that health is not always a given in these environments, and it may be necessary to meet warfighters' medical needs. What if a warfighter needs to stop blood loss, prevent disease spread, or delay injury-induced trauma, but they're miles away from the nearest support system? In austere environments, meeting these needs is not always easy. DARPA is investing in several approaches to improve warfighter access to 4 types of needs: food, water, medicine, and shelter. We want to allow our warfighters to bring what they absolutely need with them. We also want to give them the opportunity to make what they need, when they need, and where they need it. So the warfighter can be deployed to all types of environments all around the world. And what a warfighter needs to succeed can change with their environment. Some environments are exceedingly remote, driving the warfighter to use what they learn in their survival handbook and their training to survive and meet their essential needs so they can complete their mission. Other environments are the epitome of access. As a result of technological developments, most of us are probably accustomed to the common technique of using the shopping cart to grab our essential needs. When warfighters have access to large bases, commissaries, and lots of infrastructure, they, like us, drive to the local store and pick up essentials, or more recently, load them up into their virtual shopping cart and have door-to-door delivery. So DARPA has honed in on the white space between these two extremes. We want to develop technology to bring the modern convenience of obtaining basic needs to austere environments, but without all that infrastructure that's required to achieve that ideal level of access. We think that the white space between extreme environments and established infrastructure is rich for technological innovation to better support the warfighter. So this is a hard problem. The modern way to meet the basic human needs of food, water, shelter, and medicine is with an incredibly massive and complex supply network and physical structures. Oftentimes, we may not even think about everything that goes into filling our shopping carts. For our food, whether it's a fruit, vegetable, or meat, chances are it came from a large commercial farm. Whatever the source of food, it has to be grown, harvested, stored, shipped, processed, and displayed before it can be put into that shopping cart. Water needs to be collected from a source, treated at a water treatment plant, and either packaged in bottles or piped right to a faucet. And if people get sick, pharmacies and hospitals offer treatments to help them get well. With the modern approach, all of these treatments need to be created in highly specialized facilities. Warfighters often operate in the unknown without access to these amenities. As I mentioned earlier, what a warfighter needs to succeed can change with their environment. If they don't know what threats they may face, how much food or water they'll need, or what types of medical treatments they will need, how do they bring everything needed to cover all the options without relying on complex supply networks or infrastructure? And then, how do you make all of that fit into a warfighter's rucksack or at their forward operating base? And so we ask, rather than carrying a superstore's worth of food, water, and medicine, what technological advances are needed so that the warfighter could make those things in austere environments without the massive logistics issues? Beyond food, water, and medicine, infrastructure and shelter are crucial to how we meet our needs today. The warfighter also often relies on established infrastructure. Even in deployed environments, the warfighter relies on shelter, roads, and other built aspects of their forward operating bases for the duration of their mission. But the situation and the environment are not always conducive to conventional construction methods. These methods are high maintenance, needing lots of equipment and materials, not to mention, again, logistics-intensive repair processes. So again, we have that white space that needs exploring between no infrastructure and a completely built environment. What if we can develop technology to more easily meet the warfighter's infrastructure needs? What would that look like? So let's get more specific about some of the needs and what we think we can do to help. When it comes to obtaining food in austere environments, what technology does the warfighter have? Well, for food, what the warfighter has is MREs, or meals ready to eat. These are calorically dense, pre-packed meals that the warfighter takes with them. Conventional thinking has been focused on more efficiently bringing food to these environments for the longest amount of time possible. So if you're going for a day, you bring 1 MRE. If you're going for a week, you need to bring at least 7. But as I said before, it's not always feasible to bring all the necessary food. Warfighters can only carry so much weight. More food inevitably means less room for other resources, less water, less ammo, batteries, less clothes, etc. If a warfighter can't feasibly bring all their food with them, it adds complexity to any operation. They either have to leave their operating environment to resupply, or more MREs are flown or driven to them. Even at forward operating bases, the warfighter is still dependent on regular supply drops and potentially haphazard supply chains. But what happens if the MREs run out and no resupply is possible? What technology does the warfighter have when they truly have no food? Well, they can eat what they find. They take guidance from their survival handbook and they survive off the land. For example, warfighters are taught to hunt for food with a rudimentary slingshot that can be made using common materials. So we find ourselves again in that white space between survival and the built environment. With all the advances in modern technology and science, we think we can support the warfighter with options other than a DIY slingshot. So what is DARPA doing about this? We're currently approaching the food problem in 2 ways. The first is to create food from otherwise discarded materials, such as plastic. As we all know, you can't just eat plastic. But what you may not think about is that plastic is made up of the same elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, as macronutrients such as proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. But with plastic, those carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens are trapped in a configuration that is not of nutritional value to humans. So we're trying to develop a technology that will break those configurations in plastic so that the base elements can be reformed into macronutrients that are of nutritional value to humans. I'll pause for a second and ask you a question. So have you ever had yogurt, kombucha, kimchi, or a hazy beer? Well, if so, you've consumed tasty microbial biomass that is full of nutritious proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. So we think that it will be possible to use enzymatic and chemical processes to convert the polymers in discarded plastics into an organic monomeric microbial feedstock. Bacteria can then use that feedstock from the plastic to grow, gain biomass, and serve as the basis for a nutrition source to sustain warfighters. Think about a box where in one end you put in a plastic bottle, and out the other end you get a protein bar or protein powder that you can use for a shake. With this technology, if warfighters have eaten all their MREs and can't get a resupply, they can repurpose their MRE wrapper, which is plastic, and turn it into food. But what happens if you have no plastic at all? Can we still have delicious, nutritious bacterial biomass food? We think you can. And that introduces our second approach, where we're working to literally pull resources out of thin air. This technology would take the concept of edible biomass one step further and allow warfighters to feed bacteria only water and air. The bacteria, in turn, will produce bacterial biomass food. While this technology is being developed to support the warfighter, there are broader implications. Could these technologies have the potential to assist in humanitarian relief efforts, providing support to communities in crisis? Access to food is not a problem limited to the warfighter, and we're excited to see how this technology could have relevance in crisis situations when food resupply is impossible. Now, water. As a general survival rule, humans can go 3 weeks without food, but only 3 days without water. And this guideline helps illustrate how powerful the need for water is to our survival. So if we know how important water is, what are we doing to ensure our warfighters always have access to it? Well, we go back to the survival handbook. The first recommendation is to always carry extra water during missions. Subsequently, modern technology advancements have focused on how to bring more water with you more efficiently. Just like food, the conventional thinking is just bring more. To achieve that, we've moved from individual warfighters carrying bulky old metal canteens to sleek hydration bladders that have a larger capacity and are easier for the warfighter to carry. Beyond individuals, units use large containers to bring water with them. Depending on the size of the unit and the duration of the mission, they may need to bring containers that hold thousands of gallons of water, compounding already existing logistics challenges and burdens. But returning again to that question of when the needed material, in this case water, is totally out, what do we have? The survival handbook is going to tell you you need to find a water source. And there are a number of ways to obtain water. These range from lucking into a bed of water, a natural bed of water like a stream, using plant sources, or even just trying to collect the morning dew. Once you have a source of water, you can't just drink it right away, though. You have to make that water potable. Options to do so include things like boiling the water, using chemicals to purify it, or using rudimentary filters. But again, we think that we can find a solution so the warfighter doesn't have to work quite so hard for their water. I think that we probably all recognize that there can be a lot of water in the air, and we feel it on a muggy day. But even if you can't feel it, there's also water in dry desert air. What if we could use the water in the air as a source of drinking water? So we know that dehumidifiers extract moisture from air, and we know that there are other efforts to use this approach to provide drinking water. But dehumidifiers only work well under a small range of temperature and humidity conditions. And we want to be able to extract water reliably from air, even in arid conditions. So recent advances in chemistry have yielded increased uses of molecules known as metal organic frameworks, or MOFs. So MOFs are a class of compounds consisting of metal ions that are coordinated with organic ligands to form 1, 2, or 3-dimensional structures. And they're quite efficient sorbents. So a sorbent is just a material used to absorb liquids or gases. And in this case, certain MOFs are really, really good at absorbing water. By using these and other novel materials, DARPA researchers are developing technology to, once again, pull the warfighter's basic need out of thin air and fill that gap between logistically burdensome solutions for water resupply and living off the land. At the individual warfighter level, our technology is being developed to utilize better sorbent materials to provide the water with enough potable water to sustain them. Think of those hydration bladders, but instead of having to take them to the water container to refill, they automatically fill themselves by pulling water from the air. At the established unit level, we want to create devices that will provide enough potable water for up to a company-sized element. Think 150 people. Instead of a device the individual can carry, this device is envisioned to be larger and fit on the back of a truck. As with food, access to potable water is not a problem unique to the warfighter in austere environments. There are a broad range of conditions where this technology could help, and we're excited to see what further opportunities this leads to. I want to pause here for a second and let the implications of these technologies sink in. On-demand production of food and water could have huge implications for warfighters and civilians alike. While the previous solution to this problem was to bring more resources more efficiently, we think the new solution is to make those resources when and where you need them. But we know there are areas still to explore. What should we be thinking about beyond on-demand production of food and water? We want your help in thinking about what future solutions could be for these and other logistics and supply chain issues. So as I move to talking about medicine and medical treatment in austere environments, it will be helpful to just quickly walk through the overall flow of an injured warfighter's treatment. At a high level, our military health system can be distilled into the graphic shown here. Essentially, you follow the arrow and the patient is transported to the appropriate level of care for their condition. From first responder care at level 1, all the way to being transported to a specialized treatment center back in the US, level 5. We've asked ourselves, where should DARPA drive technological solutions for expeditionary medicine? Should we address the transportation aspect and find a way to accelerate patient transport so that they get to the appropriate level of care as quickly as possible? Or could we shift our medical capabilities to the left? Can we find a way to take capabilities that exist only in specialized facilities now and bring them forward to the warfighter? What if instead of having to transport a warfighter from level 1 all the way to level 5, we only needed to get them to level 3 or level 2? Or what if they never even have to leave level 1 because the first responder is able to make everything they need to treat the injured warfighter right there? I want to talk about some of our developing technologies that we envision bolstering our warfighters' survivability at the early stage of injury sustainment. To start, we want to pause the progression of an injury. The idea is that if you can hold injured cells in a static state until the injury can be treated, you can reduce the effects of an injury on the body. This buys more time to get the warfighter to the appropriate level of care they need. We're currently researching the effectiveness of small molecule chaperones, intracellular polymers, and engineered peptides to accomplish this. One of the niftier aspects, I think, of this effort is the investigation of something called intrinsically disordered proteins, or IDPs. IDPs are proteins that don't form uniquely defined three-dimensional structures. They're found in tardigrades and are hypothesized to contribute to the tardigrade's superpowers, such as surviving desiccation and even the vacuum of space. Through research into the mechanisms of research into the mechanisms of action of IDPs, we hope to develop technology to increase the survivability of injured cells and tissues. So next, as anybody who's ever donated blood before knows, there is a huge demand for it. We need lots and lots of blood for medical treatments, but blood itself is complicated. We can't make artificial blood, so right now it has to come from other humans. And blood has a complicated logistics supply chain for storing and supporting it. So blood also has lots of different separate components: plasma, white blood cells, and red blood cells, just to name a few. Making all the separate subcomponents of blood and getting them to work together is a problem that only evolution has solved so far. So DARPA's solution is a blood substitute. While the gold standard remains whole blood, we want to develop an alternative option for emergencies when whole blood is not available. We envision an alternative to blood that contains all the necessary medical components and will keep patients alive until they can receive whole blood. What if all a medic had to do was add water to a powder and they had a blood substitute right there on the battlefield? We're researching technology to produce a stable, dehydrated powder with a long shelf life that, when combined with water, will be able to fulfill the medical requirements of actual blood. So, moving on a little bit, it can be easy to be overwhelmed with information. We all have our little helpful methods to categorize and prioritize information, like maybe which emails we need to reply to first. But what if instead of something like 50 unread emails you may receive during this session, you're a doctor who just received 50 patients for diagnosing and treating? How do you possibly go about that task? So that's the problem of triage that medical care providers have to deal with during intense medical events. Triage is the assignment of degrees of urgency to wounds or illnesses to decide the order of treatment of a large number of patients or casualties. So what if instead of a doctor or medic having to assess every patient in a serial fashion, technology could help them so they could triage in parallel? This is an area that DARPA has identified as rich for technological innovation. And now for the last topic in critical care. By embedding sensors and medical treatments, last topic in critical care. DARPA is pairing cutting-edge sensors with medical materials for the purpose of wound recovery. By embedding sensors and these treatments in a material that covers a wound, we can track and respond to the healing wound. These sensors will provide real-time status updates, allowing treatments to be adjusted based on sensor feedback. This creates a sense and treat feedback loop to accelerate the wound healing process. When it comes to medicine, one of the most critical resources is time. In these early stages of patient care, it can be a race against the clock to get the warfighter the care they need. DARPA's investments will either give the warfighter more time to reach the level of care needed or reduce the amount of time needed to provide them with care. At more advanced levels of the medical treatment process, time is no longer as critical a resource. Other more specialized medical treatments are needed instead. Continuing the theme of making things when and where you need them, DARPA is investing in technology to manufacture medical treatments at the point of need. I'll talk about making 3 categories of medical treatments, and those are nucleic acid-based therapeutics, protein therapeutics, and pharmaceuticals on demand. So, nucleic acid-based therapeutics have been in the news a lot recently with the COVID-19 vaccine. There's a huge potential with mRNA-encoded vaccines to create effective vaccines against many threats. What if we could make those vaccines when and where you need them? For example, what if we were able to make the Ebola vaccine right there in Western Africa without having to wait for it to be manufactured in the US and then shipped overseas? Or what if we encounter a pathogen we weren't expecting? If you can make a safe vaccine right then, right there, to minimize impact to operations, that would be a massive win for the warfighter. Protein therapeutics are another technology that has received a lot of coverage in the news with COVID-19, and this has been in the form of antibody-based treatments. While vaccines are typically a prevention tool, antibodies can be used to prevent infection or treat an existing infection. So we're developing technology so that someday we can manufacture protein-based medical countermeasures like antibodies anywhere in the world and do so rapidly. What if instead of waiting for days or weeks for a life-saving treatment, we could respond to threats with medical countermeasures within hours? Lastly, DARPA is investing in the ability to produce pharmaceuticals on demand. Drugs are one of the most common medical tools with a wide range of applicability to treat many common health-related issues. But most drugs are designed to treat one issue. So that's the one drug paradigm. As mentioned earlier, if a warfighter doesn't know what threats they will face, they will have to bring drugs for every single threat they could encounter. That would be a lot of pills to carry. So instead, we want to give the warfighter the technology to rapidly produce whatever pharmaceutical they need exactly when they need it. Instead of the current process of large industrial labs with complicated logistics and supply chains, DARPA is developing technology to generate treatments like antibiotics or other pharmaceuticals where they're needed, when they're needed. Our medical technology investments are focused on getting more treatment options to the warfighter and allowing them to operate in austere environments. What if boxes sitting on the back of a truck could be a mobile pharmacy to provide vaccines, therapeutics, or antibiotics? Think about the outbreaks and medical disasters that could be averted by specific countermeasure production on demand. So far, I've talked about food, water, and medicine. And the last area I want to discuss is expeditionary construction or shelter. We can't expect our warfighters to live out in the wild, out of their backpacks, forever. Our warfighters eventually need some sort of long-term structure, whether for shelter or for logistics. Without modern infrastructure, warfighters will attempt to minimally reshape their environment. If they need to make a helicopter landing pad, they will flatten the earth. While effective, this is not always the perfect solution and can lead to conditions called brownout, where so much dust is kicked up from the aircraft landing that the pilots have a hard time seeing. So if you couldn't tell, that's what's shown here on the left part of the slide. And if you can't see the helicopter through that dust, imagine how hard it is to land the helicopter in those conditions. So how do we currently support the warfighter? Again, we rely on a logistically intensive infrastructure and supply chain. We have gotten really good at using construction techniques and materials to create the infrastructure our warfighters need. But what if, again, instead, we explore that white space between the two extremes and could allow the warfighter to not have to rely on things like loose dirt landing pads for their resupply? And what if we could do it without having to resort to the conventional logistics-intensive construction processes? We currently have two efforts that are researching technology to address this problem. The first looks to keep the same theme of reshaping the environment, but in a more efficient manner. This effort is developing technology that when sprayed on sand, gravel, or dirt, will harden over a 24-hour period. So this spray is a blend of unique microorganisms and growth medium. These naturally occurring microorganisms, which are typically found in the ocean, are able to take calcium and carbon dioxide from their environment to make and secrete calcium carbonate. This results in tight binding of soil particles together and the production of a hard biological concrete. So far, this technology has been primarily demonstrated to create proof of concept expeditionary landing pads for helicopters. And this has been done without the brownout problem I talked about earlier. But the use cases of this technology extend beyond that. What if we could use this to rapidly build shelter or roads or any other type of infrastructure the warfighter needs? So even as we pursue the capability to make new structures from bioconcrete, we also know that we need to be able to repair the infrastructure we've already invested in. Traditional concrete structures are a pillar of our DoD infrastructure and also happen to be difficult and expensive to repair. With so much concrete already in use today, DARPA is investing in research to reinforce our concrete infrastructure and hopefully extend that concrete service life. So inspired by the vascular systems that support continuous repair in multicellular organisms and ecosystems, we want to develop approaches to integrate a healing vasculature into concrete to repair and prevent the damage that it sustains. When we support our warfighter, we want to make sure they have the best possible resources, whether that's giving them a new landing pad, repairing an existing one, or developing new building materials. We are seeking solutions to address infrastructure and shelter issues the warfighter faces. All humans have the same basic needs, no matter where they are on the planet: food, water, medicine, and shelter. The warfighter has a unique problem in that they must meet their needs as they complete their entire mission, no matter the duration, often in austere environments. We want the warfighter to remain focused on their mission and not on where they will get their food or water from. We want to support them so that they don't have to worry about their resupply or medevac aircraft not being able to land because they don't have a landing pad. We want to respond to these challenges, find solutions to these problems, and let warfighters' focus remain on their mission instead of shifting to procuring their basic needs. While DARPA performers have made progress in these areas so far, we recognize that there are still more opportunities to solve hard problems. We want to hear your thoughts, and we want to work with you. If I'm not able to address your questions here, or if you want to learn more about how to work with us, please feel free to ask me at one of the breaks.